creeps, Andy here, and today I want to talk about the secret Stephen King book that you've never heard of. Realistically, if you're a big Stephen King fan, you've heard of this book. Even if you're not, you may have heard of this book. And that book, of course, is the novella Rage that was published by Richard Bachman, which is the pseudonym for Stephen King. I got it in this book right here, which is the Bachman Books, and we'll talk about all of this in a second, but first, I want to give an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to give a synopsis of the book Rage. I'll be talking about horrible events that it's related to, lightly, and I'll also be giving you some quotes from Stephen King directly in relation to this book, why it's out of print, why a lot of people don't know about it, all that kind of stuff. So, very first, before I begin, just know that I'm not trying to be disrespectful in this video. I don't want people to think that I'm just like blatantly disrespecting Stephen King's wishes and talking about this book, but it's really not a secret. I mean, if you go on his website and scroll through his books, it's listed on there. It's something that he's talked about before in our interviews and things like that. There are plenty of videos, obviously, made about this book. I just hope you know that I'm not trying to be disrespectful to Stephen King in any way. I respect him very much and I adore him, and he has changed my life in more ways than one. He's inspired me as a writer and as a person who reads horror. So just wanted to make that very clear. So let's just get into the synopsis of the book. This is the book that I've purchased. Kind of the reason I wanted to make this video is because I've been wanting to read Rage for a while. I've been really interested in it, especially because it's out of print, is not a book that you can easily access. And so I found it on eBay for like 30 or 40 bucks, which is a lot cheaper than I found at other places. I decided to pick it up and read it, and I wanted to make this video for Stephen King fans that are curious of what the book's about but don't have the ability to purchase it or haven't found an affordable copy, because there are plenty that are over hundreds of dollars. But this is the cover of the book and what it looks like. It says, Rage, a novel by Richard Bachman. His twisted mind turned a quiet classroom into a dangerous world of terror. I'm also probably going to have to not use all of the terms related to this book. I guarantee YouTube will not like what is in here, so I'm gonna have to like change terms around. Just, you know, bear with me. So let's get into the synopsis. First, it's about a man named Charles Decker. He is a man, he's a kid, he's in high school, and he has a lot of mental health concerns. He's a smart kid, but he doesn't have a lot of friends, and even the one friend that he has does kind of let him down at times. He can't really eat that much food. He's sick to his stomach a lot. He thinks people are after him, and he has bad dreams, nightmares, trouble sleeping. He thinks people are trying to start fights with him when they're not. So a lot of things going on with this character before we even get into the main bulk of the story. He also has a hard time with his father. They don't get along very well, and he is both physically and mentally abusive toward him. The book is interesting because we are reading it in the perspective of Charles Decker, which we'll talk about the plot in a second, but it makes this a very unique telling of a story. So basically what happens is Charlie gets kicked out of the school because of an incident that happened with a teacher, which you find out later on in the book. What happened, what it was, what led up to it, all that sort of stuff. So he ends up retrieving a weapon, ending the lives of 2 teachers, and then holding an entire algebra class hostage. So that's the bulk of the story. It almost seems like a mix between We Need to Talk About Kevin. I think this was a book, but I've only ever seen the movie, and The Breakfast Club. It is very different from how I expected it to be. So after Charlie takes this classroom hostage, it's his classroom of classmates, like he knows everybody in there, it's his classroom, and most of the kids are on his side and don't want to see him get hurt and kind of sympathize for him in a way. I have read multiple reviews. Some people think that this is kind of just like an exploration of the teenage experience and teenage angst and not being able to fully understand your emotions, and other people think that it's more of like a Stockholm Syndrome situation. I think it's dependent on the reader how it is interpreted, but basically there's one student in the classroom that's kind of against him, but everybody else kind of wants to see the best for him. They think that the experience of being held hostage has changed their lives for the better in some way, and it is a really interesting read in that aspect. Charlie goes on to I don't want to say blame, but also kind of blame his relationship with his father for him committing the horrible, atrocious things that he has committed. And he does say, specifically in relation to the first teacher, which he assaulted, that it was misplaced anger. So taking the anger towards his father and, you know, letting that out in different ways. So I don't know if that's a general consensus of why he does everything that he does in the story or just that specific thing, but I thought I would bring that up. It's also interesting that it's not just about Charlie, it is about the whole class, and they all share their secrets and experiences and insecurities. In that way, I feel like it does kind of feel like a Breakfast Club kind of situation, just with the stakes higher because they're in not a relaxed situation, they're not in detention, they're being held captive by one of their classmates. But it does feel lower stakes because the class is pretty calm, especially considering what happened. I'm sure that's due to just being in panic mode and the trauma of what they have just experienced, but it is interesting, you know, hearing them laugh and giggle and kind of carry on as if nothing had happened and kind of trust Charlie in that they won't get hurt, which most of them, not all of them, but that's also interesting as well. There's a lot of interesting ways you can read and interpret this story. He also states that he feels disconnected from himself. There's this quote here, it said, "It was like being outside myself. It was the first time I ever felt that way. Someone else, someone other than me, was in the driver's seat." He also says on days that he feels kind of pulled too thin, he says, "On these days, I'd say hi to my mom, then go upstairs and either weep or giggle into my pillow until it felt as if my guts were going to blow up. That scared me." And there's also this quote here, which I thought was kind of interesting. It says, "When you're 5 and you're hurt, you make a big noise onto the world. At 10, you whimper. But by the time you turn 15, you begin to eat the poison apples that grow on your own inner tree of pain. It's the Western way of enlightenment. You begin to cram your fists into your mouth to stifle your screams. You bleed on the inside, but they have gone so far." So I think this is kind of an interesting, relatable way of speaking about growing up and kind of like, you know, a twisted, demented, dark coming of age story of like trying to figure out your emotions and where you fit in the world and things like that. Obviously through the eyes of somebody who does have a lot of mental concerns. Even in the book, well, I guess I don't want to give too much away, but in the book, he definitely is in need of a lot of mental assistance. Take out like the horrendous events that happen. It is just interesting reading these quick lines and points of view from all of the characters in the story, just kind of relaying that common experience of growing up and not knowing who you are or where you fit into the world. I do also want to say that the narration is very interesting because Charlie obviously is an unreliable narrator. Like, he has a lot of mental health concerns, he obviously commits horrendous acts, like he's not somebody that can be trusted necessarily, but it seems like from the way the book plays out, he can be trusted to his word in some sense, because he doesn't ever say one thing and do another. He pretty much does exactly what he says he's going to do. He calls people out on lying, and he does feel very offended when people do lie and don't tell the truth fully. So it is an interesting way of approaching a narrator where he is unreliable in senses but also reliable in some ways, so you don't really quite know where you stand with him. I say interesting a lot, I don't know any other words, I guess. The story starts, the very last line in the first chapter says, "To the best of my recollection, that was about the time I started to lose my mind." So he is very aware that he's not quote unquote normal. Like, he says a lot that he's scared and he doesn't really necessarily know why he's doing the things that he does, and he does at times seem remorseful for his actions. So again, just adds more complexity to the character. Okay, really quick, not gonna get into it, but why is this story out of print? This book specifically has been linked to some horrendous events that resemble the plot of the story. These books were found on assailants that have committed these crimes in lockers or backpacks of them. I'm not gonna go into any of that, so you can do your own research if you so desire. I don't feel comfortable talking about any of that, but that is why Stephen King stopped this book for being printed. So it is now out of print. You can only buy it in, I mean, you can probably buy it in the Rage format, but I've only ever found it in this Bachman Books. But be wary that if you're buying the Bachman Books and it is normal price, they do still sell this book, but Rage has just been omitted from it. So keep that in mind if you're curious to get it. Also know that some places like Amazon sell this or the Rage book for very cheap, but it's not in English. so also be on the lookout for that if you're interested in purchasing this book. You probably find it for like around $30-$40 if you're lucky on a place like eBay. Otherwise on Amazon, I think the lowest I found it for was for like $150 or something like that. But hopefully, you know, me telling you the plot will save you from having to spend the money and buy it. I'm not speculating on anything on people that commit crimes. I'm not doing any of that. But the only thing that I'll say in relation to this is that I can see how people would think that Charlie's kind of the quote-unquote hero of the story in some way. It does play out differently than most books or films related to subjects like this, where he has complete control. He has control of the police, he has control of his psychiatrist, he has control of his principal, he has control of his classmates, the classroom, and they do seem to be on his side for the most part. So again, not speculating, but it is very different from how I've seen this kind of situation portrayed in other books and films. And I don't know, I guess I can see why Stephen King would want to take that away from the public. But we're gonna get into, I need to ask you some questions, and like I want to know your whole opinion on all of this sort of thing. Let me just read a couple of quotes from Stephen King really quickly about this book specifically, and then I'll ask you the questions, and then I'll give you your time back. I'll get out of here. Sorry, my thing stopped recording, so it might look a little different. This one, it says, in 1999, he said, "The incident was enough for me. I asked my publisher to take the damn thing out of print. They concurred." It said that rage drew heavily upon his own frustrations and pains as a high school student. He says, "Certainly in the sensitized day and age, my own college writing, including the short story Cain Rose Up and the novel Rage, would have raised red flags, and I'm certain someone would have tagged me as mentally ill because of them." I'm sure you guys could find interviews and all that sort of stuff. One last interesting thing, it was written, at least it started to be written when he was a senior in high school, and then he found it and revamped it and finished it about a decade later. So like I said, take out the violent aspects of it. I think that it is at the heart a story of the pains of growing and trying to find your way in the world. But I don't know, the story is quite controversial, and so I'm curious to know what you guys think of this if you guys have read it. I'm also curious to know what you think about writers or filmmakers or whatever taking not responsibility but feeling that their art has played a role in acts of violence. I'm curious what you think, if you think that this book should have definitely been pulled, if you think it should still be released. I'm just curious your opinions on everything. So let me know what you think about this. Anyways, I hope that you learned something, I don't know, from this video. Let me know what you think about the novella Rage by Richard Bachman, and I will see you soon with another horror video. Bye guys.